And there's something about the psychedelic space that opens up that opportunity because it creates such chaos at an internal level. And if you work with it enough, you're used to the chaos, that then you realize, I've got more room, I've got more space. Just because I'm feeling these things doesn't mean I can't get up and go do the next action or go take that next step. It's cool for the people that want to create because it's less friction between the emotional states and the abilities actually to make moves.
Hey, listeners, and welcome back to the Third Wave Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Austin, and today's episode is with Geoff Hanzlik, a good friend of mine and a man who has sat in over 750 ayahuasca ceremonies. Geoff and I met back in early 2018 through a mutual friend. Geoff had recently moved to New York from Boulder, Colorado, and was just starting to get into the high-level executive coaching scene. And so I wanted to bring him on the podcast for an episode about ayahuasca, masculinity, and the necessity of emotional regulation for mature and developed leadership. Basically, in this episode, we go into Geoff's experience as an ayahuasca facilitator for the Santo Daime church way back in the day, why he abruptly stopped hosting ceremonies after an unfortunate sequence of events with his family, and what he learned and has continued to learn about the role of emotional regulation, particularly for men in leadership positions, and what lessons plant medicine hold in that process. A few things that we touch on: why humility above all else is required when holding space for plant medicines, the 3 lessons Geoff learned from holding space that he now applies to his executive coaching, and what lessons psychedelics teach us about how to handle chaos, how to handle the unknown when we're going out in a leadership position and trying to piece together very difficult things. So, without further ado, I bring you Geoff Hanzlik. You're living in New York now. We're at your great apartment in Williamsburg overlooking the Williamsburg Bridge. How'd you find yourself here after all the work that you've done with ayahuasca, after all the work that you've done with psychotherapy, and now the work that you're doing with executive coaching? Just kind of bring us a little bit into your life and your story and like what brought you to this point.
Sure.
And start wherever you want, and then we'll just sort of like
find the river.
Find the river.
Great question. I would go to being 20 years old, and I was a student up at Middlebury College, and I was a West Coast kid, and I had transferred into Middlebury. So I was not used to the East Coast social, lubricated, deep trust funded, intellectual elite kids. And I'd never seen anything like that before, and it actually overwhelmed me. I had a really hard time that year fitting in, trying to figure out who I was amidst so much, just being in such a different culture. So I got actually very depressed at 20. And what I began to recognize is when I came out of the family that I did, that my family of origin was pretty messed up. So a lot of mental health issues on my mom's side, a lot of trauma from the military on my dad's side. So I was not equipped with the internal structures to even handle what it was that I wanted to do. And I thought I was going to be a business finance guy, had a whole path that I was ramping up for, and I just came to a grinding halt. So I flamed out of Vermont in my junior year and went onto the mountains, started working as a whitewater rafting guide, taking kids out, and started to at least feel better. But that level, like I knew that I wasn't going to succeed. And I was even at the point of suicide probably, I'd say 5 times during that period, 2021. And then I was on a backpacking course, and this is what changed my life through UC Santa Cruz. It was a bunch of hippie kids discovering organic food. This was 1996, probably. And my instructor, his girlfriend said, "Hey, there's 2 things I think would help you." And I was a mess, like crying every day. I couldn't even function. A lot of anxiety. I was freaked out. And this was in Oregon. And she said, therapy. So I was 21 years old, 22. So I started going to therapy. I used to ride my bike down to therapy, pay my $30 out of my pocket, doing Hakomi therapy, which was somatic based. And I had to. It was a forcing function. Like, it wasn't some sort of idea that therapy would be good for me. It was, if I didn't do it, I was going to not be here. And then the other half of that was, she said, "I think you should try ayahuasca." And this is 97, mind you. So it was not cool and hip. In fact, it was cultish and Schedule 1. It was intense. So
there's probably still a lot of stigma and people don't really understand it. And
like nobody knew anything about it.
When you first heard about it, what were sort of your like initial impressions of ayahuasca and that sort of world?
I was terrified. And I think my biggest question back then was, what is it going to taste like? And it represented, if you drink this thing, something's going to happen, and I don't know what that's going to be. So at that point, I went to my first ceremony, I still remember. And I took it, and my thought was, hey, that didn't taste that bad. I got it down, and I had a very heart-opening experience after that first drink. And then the second drink was a moment where it hit in a way that it hits, and I had never seen anything like that. And the panic and the anxiety and all the things that came over my system. And interestingly enough, it was a super organized group. So it was about 40 people, and it's called the Santo Daime religion, which is based out of Brazil. And it was just this niche little crew of adults up in Oregon that had this church up there, which is crazy. Like, what are they doing? It's way up in the Ashland, Oregon. So I remember going to the bathroom and wanting it to stop, begging it for it to stop. And the voice said, stand up. And I looked at myself in the mirror. And I remember saying, all right, you're going to figure out how to handle yourself on this. Because if you can handle yourself on this, then you can start to look at your life and put certain pieces in place. So that was the initial encounter. And I left there probably partially traumatized and also extremely elated with something that I felt was the first time something could take care of me and I could work with it. So I started going back, somehow facing this gnarly thing. But again, it's that if you're up in the corner and the suffering is so high, you got to do something.
You'll do anything.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that was the place like I would just had to do something. And this was finally a lifeline into getting better. So I saw that if I stayed with this probably over, I didn't know how long it would take, that ultimately I could find myself again. Because I remember one of the memories I have up at Middlebury was sleeping outside by myself, probably the spring, on a sleeping bag, looking up at the stars. And my thought was, even the stars are unfriendly. Like I was so lonely, so isolated, I didn't have anywhere to go. I was so shut down. So to go from that into seeing some sort of possibility that I could connect to humanity and engage, that was a big deal. So I just started working. And going back to my therapy, I was doing a lot of somatic work with my body and starting to realize, oh man, first time. These are fun stories, right? Like the first time I ever went to therapy.
Yeah, what was that like?
I think I was 22. I had a 1976 VW van that a friend gave me that had tie-dyes all over it. So it was kind of this hippie kid driving around, and I knew I had to go, and I parked in front of the office, and I looked at the door. I was like, shit, I think I have to go face this. So I walked in and I sat down, and my face was bright red. I was sweating. It was some nice, Southern Oregon, very gentle Hakomi therapist who said, are you feeling anxiety right now? And I never had language for any of this. And I was like, how did you know? Wow. Yes. As a matter of fact, I'm feeling anxious. And then my next thought was, oh shit, I'm going to have to tell her I masturbate because she can see everything, But it was so funny. So I had a really good session, like a breakthrough. And it was the first time I had actually humanly connected with somebody. So I think those two things together of being able to work spiritually and beginning to unlock the inside and see some possibilities in a very rigorous fashion. And the way the Daime was set up there was so clear and organized ceremonially. I wasn't walking into an unclean space, like people had their shit together. And then having a framework for therapy where I started to work with my body for the first time in my life, that there was these things called sensations, like what's that? Someone actually would talk to me about emotions. I didn't even know you could do that. So these are all revolutionary things. And I had to sort of start to piece myself back together. And I just rebuilt my operating system through those two channels over the next 15, 17 years.
So you're 20 years old, you're struggling with depression, like crippling depression, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
You go back out to the West Coast, you start doing Hakomi therapy, which I just heard about a couple months ago.
Really?
I interviewed someone else for the podcast named Francoise Borzat.
Uh-huh.
She just published this book called Consciousness Medicine, which is fantastic, all about like preparation, experience, and integration for guides. And she's a Hakomi practitioner.
Beautiful. So
I started looking into it. It's somatic-based therapy.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's something I've been like potentially, wanting to do myself. Yeah.
It's the best.
Is it?
It's awesome.
Is it? Okay. So you do that. That gives you at least an initial framework of starting to drop with your body. And then like you start working with ayahuasca. You know, how deep did you get into that world?
Oh boy. I think as far as you can take it, I was probably in that top 5% of people. When you're in your 20s and your 30s, you're looking for an identity. Everyone is. Like, who are we? We kind of need something that we do. You see a lot in adolescents. Like, if they're into basketball, they wear basketball gear. Like, they take on like the band that they love and they suddenly become. So for me in the 20s, I didn't have much of an identity. And so like I became the ayahuasca kid. Like, I saw this. And there was this path of growth that you could take through it. And one of the channels was if you became a musician, you could kind of engage. You had a job. And that was the best thing about the Daime is everybody has a job. So it was probably the 6th time I went or 7th time. And we were in the middle of a ceremony and there was nobody to play the guitar. And I had brought my guitar, and the guy that was leading it was a room of like 15 people, small. He like looks at me, and I never forget, like everything's turning green. I think I'm gonna throw up. I can hardly move. And he looks at me and he uses his fingers like he's playing a guitar and goes, "Go get it." And I just thought, oh my God. And I went and I picked up my guitar, shaking, and I put a capo on to put it in some kind of tune. They were already singing, and I'd never forget it. Like, I strummed this chord and it was exactly in the key that they were singing in. And it just, this brightness came about, and I got deep into it, and I studied this music for the next 15 years. And one of my goals, it was funny, you have ambition, like most of these people in New York, like driving towards these careers. My goal was like just to become like super dialed musician in the ayahuasca world. Yeah, you can't make any money that way, but
it's cool.
It's cool, right? Yeah. And so you learned a lot of musicians. So I would go to ceremonies minimally twice a month, maximally 6 to 8. During that time for a lot of years, because when you're a musician, you're doing all these ceremonies, right? So the calendar's quite full on the weekends. Maybe you have a Friday, Sunday deal going on, and the way the Daime is set up is you could have a Friday night meditation one, and then another 10-hour thing on Sunday. And then I really wanted to get into. I love the music so much, and I used to be a Fish fan, and I used to be a Grateful Dead guy. So it was somehow like getting to play guitar and be the one guy of a couple in the room, and everything's keyed around the music. So I loved playing and kind of being the main influence, one of the two in the room that's actually driving people's journeys. And it was very instructive for me of how music and how intention and how where you're located in yourself, how that could move through the sounds of the guitar, and actually you could look at someone and play something and watch them smile and open up and start healing just through the sounds of music. Was interesting study. Yeah, so I went really far, and then we had a troupe of some folks, about 4 or 5 of us in Oregon. We would start traveling around, and we would have these workshops. And the guy I was with, he was the main leader of the church, and he was the guy that actually freed the Daime during, early 2000s when the DEA came to his house and was going to arrest him. He did arrest him, threw him in jail. It was right before Y2K, so we were just I think we had like 250 liters like stocked up, like, because we didn't, if the computers went down and we couldn't have our tea, we'd be in trouble. So we like stockpiled all this. He was a really revolutionary guy. His name's Jonathan Goldman, and strong figure, resilient, and pretty visionary. So a lot of shit went down. DEA came, took all the ayahuasca, threw him in jail, which then led to a whole 2 to 3 year legal process in the state of Oregon. And now, they fought it and won. And so that's why, at least in Oregon, it's legal.
For the Santo Daime.
I
think in New Mexico, it's like the UDV.
The UDV, yeah. So Jeffrey Brofman and John Goldman were together working on this at the same time, and there was politics, and people were, these different channels. But hats off to them. That was not an easy work. And to sort of stand for ayahuasca in the face of jail was a big deal. And so, nowadays it's amazing that ayahuasca is so prevalent. It's just in vogue, and you can drink it with anybody. You're in Brooklyn, you could just like
10 circles every
exactly.
weekend.
It's just happening. And everyone's just sort of like, now it's cool. And like, did you go? And I want to go. And it's very open. But back then we wouldn't even we'd have to not even talk on our phones about it. And it's very so a lot of people did a lot of work, I think, over those initial years to sort of bring this forward and kind of plant the flag.
So what was that like for you, going from, you come into the space not knowing anything about ayahuasca, having some preconceived notions about, it being this sort of hippie thing. And it sounds like you had your own hippie tendencies if you were listening to Fish and, so you had like one foot in that world.
Yes.
But you also had a foot in the world of, you wanted to study finance and kind of, be somebody.
Yeah. I was a white kid from private school in Southern California. Christian Science background with like this whole trajectory. And so I still had that fundamental structure of education and the culture that my parents believed in. But I just knew that whatever I was coming out from my youth and whatnot, that I had to do it my own way and do it differently. But my system broke down, and so it was within the ayahuasca, and it was with doing all that therapy that I began to slowly piece these things together. And we've been, this has been a long journey just to get to where we are today. But it's amazing. I'm so grateful for that work because it gave me so many tools that today are highly useful in everything I do. I'm an executive coach now. I was a psychotherapist for a long time. I do a lot of work with people, just helping them move out of very difficult states and into better states of self, but also connecting that up to who they are in the world, what their careers look like, what can they build. A lot of entrepreneurs. It's a lot of fun. I think what makes me able to work with them at least from the entrepreneurial perspective, is that's a pretty risky state to constantly put your system into. There's a lot of unknowns. So to hang out in ambiguity, ayahuasca is a great training for that, because it just throws you out in the middle of nowhere, kind of the ocean without a life raft, and you just have to handle yourself in the deepest way.
And it's like, it's obviously safe enough where you're not going to die, or you're not going to like.
But you think you will.
Sure, your ego is going.
Yeah, it's almost like you will. You think you're dying, but even you can think, "Oh, I'm not going to die," but it's like, no, I'm probably going to die.
The fear is there still. You feel that fear. It's like right in the stomach and the heart.
Absolutely. But I remember one of the tricks one guy told me. He said, "You will go home after this." And I used to tell him that over. Okay, at least I'm going to go home and have my pancakes and like chill out. I'll be okay. But that was a really powerful process. And what started to happen for me was, because I was a musician, I mean, this is just a bit of the journey, is I got picked up to work with some interesting people that do this work called the Path Work out of the East Coast, out of down near Charlottesville in Virginia. Great therapist, really strong, solid teachers. And they were kind of doing a deeper work, combining healing work with ayahuasca with their therapy. Like, I was a hired gun to just play music for them. So it was just one of those being right place, right time. So I would travel with them and we would do these 5-day retreats with 10 to 15 people doing therapy. And so we would do these ceremonies and then do therapy all day, and then do ceremonies and do therapy all day. So a lot of the development for me was using ayahuasca in therapeutic context, both with the people from the original church I was at. We were traveling doing that, and then these very specialized therapeutic applications. So you learn a lot. And I think that helped me really understand the human system. You understand the emotional body, the spiritual body, and also how that affects the physical system. And it's amazing. Like, it's nothing's automatic and nothing works always. And you have to go through a lot of shit. And it's not like it's a guarantee that it's just healing. It's hard. It's grindy work to get yourself through. But I find that people that actually stick with it and really take it seriously, there's a prize to be won at the end of it.
So one of the big things that has come up, in the psychedelic space as of late, is this concept of integration. Right. Where we have this experience with something like ayahuasca, or it could be with mushrooms, or, any other psychedelic, or it could just be, a sweat lodge, or, breath work, or whatever it might be. But basically we have this opening, or this clarity, or this insight. When you're doing this work with the Santo Daime, or, the path, what was your own process of for integration? How did you handle integration in those early days when there really wasn't, it's not like you could just Google like psychedelic integration online and find a coach. It was really kind of on your own shoulders, probably through like maybe the teachers that were teaching you. What was that process like for you from like an integration perspective?
Right. That's a great question. I think what was cool back then was that you got thrown into the deep end, and there was a level of having to figure it out. And in that process of what works for me, I think there was an opportunity to figure out your own system and what works. And so by nature of suffering a lot, you start to work towards, well, what supports. And so the main pieces for me is just go to therapy, pay the $125, $150. It's the best money ever spent per week. I mean, you have to be doing that work. I don't know how you actually can develop, how you can evolve. It just takes care of all that noise. And I call it building fences. It allows you to build a fence around all that inner material. You can meditate, you can do all those good things, but at the end of the day, unless you're processing it through with somebody, I just think it hangs, and it's sticky, and it's gummy, and it just creates problems. So for me, it was consistently staying with therapy. I was really grateful for that. Doing a lot of physical activity, being in my body, just playing sports, and I mean, going for a lot of runs, just being really physical that way, like just basic stuff, drinking a lot of water. And I was, married at the time. I was married for 19 years, and also having a partner that was willing to process a lot of this stuff with me too. I mean, I think we were both hell-bent on developing and getting better. We used each other as a lot of conversation around this kind of having at least a partner to, as you're growing, they're growing. There's something in the middle that there's a shared understanding. So all of those I think were really key, and having community, people that you can just talk to and are supportive through it. So those are the key ones. Yeah.
So when you were out of the worst of it, so to say, you started to work with ayahuasca
Just last week. Yeah.
right? Things are getting better and better.
Yeah.
Externally, how did things shift for you? So there was a lot of internal things going on, but like externally, what changed for you in terms of maybe how you interact with other people or how you even perceived your sense of self? What were some of those external changes that you can point to that go, yeah, that's why ayahuasca, or that's why therapy, or that's why, doing some of this deep work was so meaningful and transformative for me?
I think once I started to clear out some of that emotional noise, the gumminess, there was a bit more clarity and just in terms of who I was. And I think the anxiety got lifted. So I didn't feel as reactionary and needing to do things so I didn't have anxiety. Questions started to be, well, what would be interesting? Or what would I like to do? Or, what am I drawn to? I was young, so I had kids already. I mean, 5 years in, I was married with 2 children doing all this ayahuasca. And, there's a forcing function. For me, I'm a guy that just, if you're suffering or you need money, are like the 2 reasons I'm going to get off my ass and do stuff. I think if I don't have those, I'm sipping lattes and reading something, whatever, just like getting lost. And so it was really good for me to have a financial responsibility, responsibility to a partner, as well as to my own sort of emotional well-being. So as I began doing those work, what I found was I had a natural gift. I think I'm answering this in a roundabout way, but as I began to finally clarify, it became this idea that, wow, I could actually help people by doing therapy. I've done so much. I understand the internal system. I can make $150 an hour instead of making 17 or 15 bucks as a carpenter or a cabinet maker.
Is that what you were doing then?
Yeah,
for
man.
some of your
I had
20s?
8 jobs. I was cleaning houses. I was doing financial books for people. I was doing midnight work painting in commercial buildings. I just opened up a private practice doing psychotherapy, barely, for $30 an hour. I mean, whatever it took, I was doing. It was such a grind. This is about a decade ago. And it was a series of just taking clients, getting better, experimenting with ayahuasca with clients, just doing one-on-ones with them, and showing up every day to the kids, showing up every day to the marriage, and that kind of consistent development and growth. The thing is there's no fast track. One challenge I sense is that people take ayahuasca once so they can have an opening experience and then suddenly go, I got it. Or maybe I've taken it 10 times and now I'm ready to bring others along on this. And it's a day-to-day grind, and you're going to have your ups and have your downs. And if the support system is solid and you're showing up to work every day, it's just things start to shift.
Well, one thing that you said maybe about a year ago that always has stuck with me. I mean, there are a few things that you've told me that have always stuck with me, but this one in particular, we were talking about a community, which I won't name, but we're talking about a community, and about how, many of them were somewhat new to ayahuasca and psychedelics. So they had this sort of energy about them, this
Yes.
drive of, okay, I've just been doing this a year or two. Let's come out. Let's make things happen. And I think, what you said at that point was something along the lines of, well, wait till you've been doing this 5 years, and then wait till you've been doing this 10 years, and then wait till you've been doing this 15 years, essentially saying like, there's no end to this. The layers of the self go deeper and deeper and deeper. And just when you think I've, quote unquote, become enlightened, or quote unquote, I get it, or quote unquote, I'm there, life throws you another curveball. And I think this speaks to why like psychedelics and ayahuasca are so great, because they sometimes can help you adapt, to those curveballs.
Yeah, I mean, my own sort of great shame story here is I had great ambition to be a rock star. And so I play the guitar really well, and I can play in ceremonies and you get 100 people in there and the place rocks and the music going and it finishes, and there's that sort of spiritual materialism, like I'm the guy. And because I'm a quick study, over about 5 years of doing that, I figured, shit, I know stuff. And then people said, well, you should start your own place. You should start your own thing. And so I moved to Boulder, Colorado, and planted a flag, and started serving people ayahuasca, and was doing it in my house. You bring 10 people in, 15 people in, 20, and then you're kind of the guy, and suddenly you have an identity, and people are asking you questions, and they want your opinion. I like that. I felt like that was very important.
You felt important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I had
respected and looked up to, and like, okay, I'm here. Yeah.
Absolutely. Ayahuasca is so cool. It's fun talking about it. I haven't thought about ayahuasca in this way in a while, but it's fun because what I find that it does is it's completely allows whatever you want. Sure, go for it. If you want to rename yourself Raven, Little Hawk running or something, and be the guy serving ayahuasca, and you've only been doing it 3 years, it'll say, yeah, go for it. I think you should do that. And you'll do that. And so I had my own version of being, I didn't name myself that, but I thought I was cool.
What did you do? what were some of the things that you did?
I just thought I was the man. And I must have been 33 or 34. And I never forget this time. We had a big ceremony in our house in the living room the night before. I don't know, big, but it was, enough people, like full. And then the next morning, I remember just breaking. And what I wasn't paying attention to is if you're going to invite people into your house to do this kind of a ceremony, for instance, or if you're a therapist and you're inviting people into your office, or if you're going to have something to say, if you're writing an article about like development and you think you have a point of view that is worth considering, you might want to consider that and the position you're taking, because what started to happen was I had to kind of work with everybody else's energy that was coming in. So people open up themselves, they drink this drink, and then they just let go. They feel better, but what are you going to do with all that stuff? Where's the drain? Where's that going down to? Who's transmuting that actually? And ayahuasca will do some of the heavy lifting, but you still have to, if you're facilitating, take it on. And so that's a tricky business. And I never forget, I had an emotional break at the breakfast table, and I was so mad, and I had a plate of pancakes. It's like both emotional. I feel like I'm going to cry, but also laugh. Like I broke the plate of pancakes, and the plate shards went everywhere. And my 3-year-old daughter was standing there, and one hit her eye, and she started bleeding and crying. And I just thought, holy shit, it just came to this? Like, here I am, Mr. Light, bringing all this light to the world. And now I'm like cutting my daughter's eye because I can't handle my own anger. And it was just a wake-up call. And I think within 2 weeks, I just was like, I'm out. Like, I'm not doing this anymore because I haven't developed myself enough to hold space for this many people. It's not my bag. So I've got my own homework to do. I'm going to go much more quietly and kind of take care of my own garden before I feel like I should actually have something to say for other people. So
where did that take you then? When you talk about taking care of your own garden, and like what were the next steps for you?
Yeah, that's a good question.
For you after that?
Not to quote Jordan Peterson, because I'm not a huge Jordan Peterson fan, but I mean, his whole thing, he's talking about how are you going to go help people if you can't make your own bed? That sensibility. And I basically needed to look at a lot of stuff around my shadows, the shadows around my sexuality. You and I have talked about this. I was married for 19 years, never acted out of it. But the intensity of my sexuality, because I got married very young, was very much in my face. And I didn't know how to work with that. And in some ways wasn't an emotionally safe person around intimacy, even with my ex-wife back then. And I didn't know how to work that. So one of the things I just did was a year of somatic work on my body, trying to understand my sexuality so I could actually hold it better and be more clear. That's a whole thing. Figuring out my finances, just getting tighter on my money, like having my books. And how do I show up as a father? Can I just be here day in and day out with needing to just pop off and escape and go to my next ayahuasca retreat? Because that's what I was doing. I mean, I had this sort of life, and I could call it I'm spiritually developing. But I wrote a lot off to this sort of spiritual development when I was just going to ayahuasca to play guitar and have a great time and then come back, but walk back in the door and go, there's a lot of work here to do just to lift up my own energy, lift up the family, and be supportive and be somebody that's contributing. There's a lot of learning.
Well, it's a big burden to take on in your early 30s. I'm 28, almost 29. I turned 29 in a week. And a lot of things that you're talking about now in terms of that breakdown that you had, I went through earlier this year, which we spoke about, over dinner a couple times, where essentially I drank a bunch of ayahuasca at the beginning of this year at a couple retreats. And kind of like you were saying, ayahuasca said, yeah, go do this and go do this and go do this. And I went and like did some of those things. And then
See that cute girl over there? She
Yeah.
really likes you. You're the man. You got it, buddy. Look how handsome I am. Well, you are handsome.
But then there are these sort of like second and third order consequences that
Yeah.
you're just so in the medicine space that you don't quite have the understanding of like what might happen as a result of that. And for me, after I did those 2 straight weeks of ayahuasca, I was so ungrounded that I did a couple things that were like big mistakes looking back. At the same time, it's like that was the only way I could learn the lessons that I needed to learn to really
Perfect, right?
move on to the next stage. And I think this is what we're talking about when it comes to like development and when it comes to maturity and when it comes to learning and when it comes to the work, right? Like I had been doing psychedelics for, I started when I was 19. I was always very intentional and reflective and, but at the same time, 9 years into doing psychedelics, clearly I still have my own issues with ego. Clearly I still have my own issues with the way that I relate to people, with arrogance from time to time. And it's just like, when you think you've got it, it's just like, no, go look at this and go look at this and go look at this. And it's almost like the more aware you become, the more you realize that, just like the layers and layers, they keep going. Like the depth doesn't end necessarily.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, I have a few things that strike me with that. I totally identify. And the second it becomes your identity, that you're this person that's evolved and now I have something to say around it. And I thought Steve Kotler said something interesting. He was talking about how when he stands on stage, I'm totally going off here, but that he's in a position of a teacher on stage. But when he gets off stage, he doesn't want to remain that guy. So then he'll just start asking questions to people for like 10 minutes. Just get himself out of, I have something to say versus I want to just rebalance this out. So I think that's really interesting. And that fixed identity piece. And the other thing I think is we were referencing earlier, these signposts, like going back to your earlier question about, you see someone drink 5 times, they think they got it, or they think they have something to say on it, or they've done it for a year and they take a position on it. And, I think I was there for 17 years and that's kind of a certain, like, okay, that's a certain threshold. There's people that are 25, 30. But then you see the 5-year wave of those people that have done it for 5 years and they think they know this thing. Then you see them at 10 years and it's not that developed or that advanced. And I know shamans that are friends of mine that are now 20, 25 years and they're kind of over it. Like they want to retire or they do something else. And it's like a job as opposed to this kind of,
spiritual calling.
I mean, it's instead of this Instagram culture where I get to like kind of be this person that has this thing, I think we all need an identity that way. But a lot of humility is required until you fall on your face and get hammered enough times, then I think that's where you might have something to say. It's just when you think you don't. So it's kind of interesting.
There's a quote that I've loved lately, which is something like, wisdom teaches me that I am nothing and love teaches me that I am everything. And life basically exists between those 2 points.
Yeah, so that's really sweet. Yeah, I love that. Until then, it's nice. I don't know, maybe the 40s is easier. You don't have to think so much. But I like this thing that we were talking about too between this is kind of looking at this track of, I'm really interested right now in how psychedelics are used. I'm not facilitating anymore, but I because there's so many people that can. I think that's amazing. I mean, what an amazing time we are that if you want to microdose, you can go online and find a course. I love it. I send people all the time. I'm like, oh, you have to meet Paul, go to the 3rd wave, and you're going to, start there. Because people have a lot of questions, and there's a huge amount of need to develop and to grow. And I'm so interested in how psychedelics and ayahuasca and all the tools that we have for that provide the opportunity and the technology for us to work with the interior, I think. And I think therapy's grown a huge amount over the last, Hakomi was something back in the late 90s that came out of Buddhism and, attract a lot, and there's somatic experiencing. And now there's so many new branches that have come off that are very intelligent and evolving and stacking on top of what was already the frameworks that have already been laid, and it's amazing. And how this use of psychedelics this way allows you kind of entry into your internal states and allowing you this kind of gateway into how do your emotions work, and they can be very uncomfortable. Like I tend to be a guy that just thinks that psychedelics, and not to be self-flagellating, suffering absorbed person, because that's not who I am, but it's through the suffering that you learn so much. And psychedelics can be highly intense. And ayahuasca is not a comfortable experience for anybody. You might have a good night, but it's generally a doorway through a lot of pain and a lot of hurt, and finding out those sort of cubbies and closets that you didn't take care of for a while, and there's some gnarly shit in there. But it's amazing that it can teach you to relate to a lot of emotions that you would not want to be in relationship with, or that you push off. Negative emotions, a lot of anxiety, sadness, depression, anger, huge amounts of rage, resentment. There's a huge amount of resentment, I find as well. And generally people don't want to go snooping around that. You're not going to say, hey, come over, let's jump into that for an evening. But you get in there, and once you start to form a relationship with these really challenging places, it changes things. And I used to do a lot of trauma work with kids and adults, but I like doing it with teenagers because you don't think they have capacity to really do work, but sometimes they're the most open, because also it's these kids that have no friends. They were always the ones for me that like broke my heart. These 16-year-olds that had no social skills, which is how I felt probably in my early 20s, which is why they're so close to my heart. But they would come in and they just had no recourse. They didn't know what to do. So I had a chair in my office called the work chair. And it was separate from the couch. And you put a kid on the chair or an adult, and you say, okay, close your eyes. And you've done this work. We all know it really well. So what do you notice in your belly? What do you notice in your chest? And people start to pay attention. And the young people would initially close their eyes, and within 5 seconds open their eyes again, because they were like, I'm getting vertigo. I don't know what's inside there. It hurts. And they would leave. But they would come back. And there's this one kid, it's my favorite story of all time. He was such an awkward kid. My God, poor guy. He had no chance. His favorite car was a Prius at 16. And he went to Men's Warehouse and like dressed in suits at 16 to public high school. I'm like, man, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
But he came in, and to his credit, and he wasn't getting any invites to parties. He couldn't participate in clubs. Like, nobody invited him anywhere. He was a bummed out, very depressed kid. And so we started to do this work. And I lined out to him. I said, we're going to learn how to put a picnic blanket down in the cave of your despair. And that was always the metaphor, is let's go to the cave, and we'll walk up. And first day you're here, we're going to look at the entrance to the cave. It's dark. You don't really know what's in there. Great. And now I'm going to tie a rope to your belly. And then you're going to go in and just close your eyes. What do you feel when you start walking into the cave? He's like, oh, I feel nervous. I feel anxious. It lives in my chest. My stomach's tightening up. Great, come back out. And week after week, and he finally was able to like rappel down, because you can get very metaphorical. He rappels down and pulls out his blanket from the knapsack and hangs out. And he's like, I'm in the midst of my despair. How does it feel? And he goes, it sucks. How are you breathing? I'm breathing. He starts breathing. And then suddenly he's like, you know what? This isn't that bad. And I love that, because that's the basis of the work, the fundamentals of how we can operate. Because today we're running around with our phones, running around distracting, going to the next thing, moving really fast, and not taking that time to sort of check in. And we don't have to make our identities about checking in on ourselves and sit in Whole Foods and stare at each other for a long time and talk about the yoga classes we're going to. But we can know fundamentals. And I think the psychedelic work and the ayahuasca work and all these provide this avenue in a very clean, coherent way to connect the emotional work with the kind of that spiritual, in the way the psychedelics can sort of break down thoughts, break down your body in certain ways that there's no handholds. I really believe in that stuff. And then if you get some like stars that are shining and it's flying out and there's some red carpets and you're getting to the massive crystal people and talking to alien, like, great. I think you should totally do that.
Bonus.
Yes, all bonus material. And great, definitely write that in your journal, and that can inform you. But the best work that you can walk out of is being extremely grounded.
And knowing yourself and becoming comfortable with all aspects of yourself, even the parts of yourself that are the scariest or
that you hate.
Or that you hate.
Yeah. And for me, the parts that it took me a long time, I'm 45 now, working through my sexuality in a really clean, coherent way that even my 18-year-old son's visiting, and we can have conversations about his body and his sexual desires, and how do you hold that in a clear way and in a safe way, but also not be too scared from the Me Too movement and then like cut off your masculinity. Like, what is that role? And I learned a lot in that work.
Well, and you've been one of my biggest mentors in that work. You've made a couple really good book recommendations. The King, Warrior, Lover, Magician.
Yeah, Robert
and
Moore.
Iron John by Robert Bly.
Yeah.
I'd love to go into that a little bit. Like,
Sure.
what have you learned about sexuality and masculinity that either, from ayahuasca, from your own work that you've applied to your own life? What's that process been like for you?
It all goes back to Burning Man.
It does? It does, yeah?
Yeah, man, a big thing happened for me at Burning Man because this is a pretty candid story, but I was married for 19 years in New York for a couple of years. And when I went to Burning Man, I was in a place in my own marriage where we were kind of on the line where I wasn't acting outside the marriage. I'm a student of myself, but I had a question about men. And I'm still holding this question. If you haven't had sexual experiences and then you get married, do you actually need to go have those sexual experiences in real time? Or can you actually work them out internally and maintain one partner all the way through? And we could go into the Esther Perel work. I mean, there's a lot of work being done on this, and it's an open conversation. But that's like a strong holding question for me. And so I left to Burning Man holding that question, but not feeling like I was going to act outside of that. I knew I wasn't. So I went to Burning Man, which ended up being a really, whatever. Burning Man's Burning Man. I stayed true to the course and like really worked myself. And I remember coming back from there feeling like amazing. Like I actually learned that I could work with my internal states and I don't have to act out on anything. And that gave me some piece of truth. And the second I got back from Burning Man, I remember texting my ex-wife, who was my wife at the time, and saying, I'm back. And it was an amazing trip. And I also got some jobs because I networked really well. Our money's taken care of, all sorts of things. And she said, don't come home. And it was a really shock to my system. And that unraveled a whole bunch and sent me on a big journey about what does that mean? And the study around the sexuality piece for me at this point is it really unlocks something. And what I've learned is now, being a single guy at my age after a year and a half and being in some relationships, expanding that. God, I mean, it's recognizing that it's so layered with so much stuff from our childhood, so much shame, so much stuff on top of what we think it is and what we think it isn't. A lot of mores, even around pornography is like a whole thing. And I was like interested in it and kind of into it, but it was really bad because it wasn't okay. And like, I don't know. And then even having like a girlfriend saying, recently I was telling my son this, she's like, what kind of porn do you like? And not having an answer, like a good answer, like, well, you know what I like, actually made me look stupid, which is like a whole flip, And I was like, oh, well, maybe I should figure out what kind of porn I really like. Just so it's open and like I don't have to, and the thing I'm learning is I just don't have to shut all of it down and I don't have to put judgments around it and it can be okay. And I just have to really stay honest with it, make room for it, let it out, let it be there, but also be a good gentleman around the whole thing and be clear. So I don't know. I'm still in this deep study around it. It's deep fun.
It is a lot of fun.
I love sexuality. I think it's an incredible part. I think men struggle a huge amount with it. I think a lot of guys have no sense of how to actually work with themselves.
There's no awareness typically for most men around their own sexual energy and how they can work with
it. And a lot of women are suffering for this too. I mean, I go on dates, if you're in New York, you're dating online because that's the way people date. And I just like talking to women about this. And you just get a lot of stories of there aren't men that know how to show up on just a very basic level. They're not in touch with their bodies. They're not in touch with their emotions. Communication isn't so great. Just some basic fundamentals that could really support the process. So I'm endlessly curious about it.
I feel like there's a really good transition point here
Sure.
with the professional work that you do.
Yeah.
So when you're starting to work with executive clients and starting to bring some of your own tools, like, the work that you do with ayahuasca, your the fundamentals that you learn from psychotherapy, the stuff that you're learning now around sexuality. Mm-hmm. How do you show up then for a client? Like, why do clients come to you? Why do clients want to work with you specifically? What sort of questions are they asking? What sort of things are they struggling with?
I work as an executive coach as a bread and butter piece for pre-IPO startups, early stage through Series C, CEOs, founders, and kind of the teams that surround them are the basic group. You get hired because tactical operational skills. And so a lot of times people are bringing you in to help their company because you can speak to speak. So you're going to get into hard skills about how to run a company, from having your vision to a roadmap to OKRs to how you're running your one-on-one meetings. And that's a bit of my world, is just sort of hanging out up in those basics. But once it's a little bit of being, as we were talking about before, the wolf in sheep's clothing. So once you inside and they trust you, then you're beginning to have second secondary layer conversations where the self is emergent and blind spots are showing up and they're seeing where they're causing pain. And it's a really interesting journey to kind of get under the layers of that. These super successful people, I mean, God, they're so polished. I mean, anybody that's running a company from the external, it always looks like they're crushing it and they're killing it and they're doing great. I don't know any company that's doing, once you start talking to people, the people aren't stressed. And they're just on the next series of funding or what's happening in the next quarter or the numbers aren't right or it's never ending. And I really love the work once you're in with them enough that there's trust built and you start to get the real story, that they don't really have someone to talk to about the deeper fears that they have. Why am I doing this? What's the purpose? Here I am doing this company. Is this the best use of my time? I'm working 15s, year after year, and we don't even know if we're going to hit this thing. And, a few guys pop through, a few women pop through and become the unicorns and get the payouts. But a lot of people are grinding in this, and it's not an easy space. So I think the work that I love so much is when you're under that level of stress, things start to pop, and that's where your shadows come out. It might show up with your team, how you talk to people. It shows up in your arrogance. It shows up with their families. And so that deeper work around, I don't know, what happens if we just sit here? How are you really doing? It's just a very basic human thing. And can we just connect you back to yourself, back and just using breathing? And it's okay right here. And that basic ground that we've talked about, that I've been able to develop after 20 years of this work, kind of underground. I love this idea that we're open loops and that as humans. And so if we sit in a room and if you're highly anxious, let's flip it. Let's say I'm highly anxious and you're extremely regulated. Depending on if your regulation is bedrocked and solid and baked in enough that it's stronger than my anxiety, then you're going to draw me into your grounded state. But if it's not rooted, my anxiety is higher than your ability to maintain your regulation, then I'm going to pull you into an anxious state. And that's a really interesting idea. And so I love working with leaders in that way, because what are you bringing? What state are you coming in on? And are you able to draw people into your settled calm state rather than being driven by the anxieties? And then if you come in and you're not regulated and you're dropping in all that shit, that is just going right into the team. It's just brutal. And I find a lot of executive teams suffer for this because there's no time and everybody's just tactically driven, right? Just looking at the numbers, looking at what's happening quarterly, whatever product market fit just isn't happening that we thought that it would, or maybe it did, but now we don't know how to market it. I mean, there's so many questions and people are up to their ears. So I'm super interested right now in organizations of helping people drop into, I trust that if we drop into a state, then we're going to, from there, find a more interesting solution. And that's hard. That's a hard sell, man.
The hard sell.
Yeah, no one believes you. If you say, let's get to a better state, and then they're like, yeah, right. Who has time for that? And so a lot of people have, ideological ideas. That's kind of repetitious, but they have a sense, they're very idealistic about the way companies could be run. But until you're in the midst of it all, it's hard to do, right? And so how do you make an offsite, take people off? Maybe they have a deep experience, connect with themselves and each other, but finding ways to make that sticky when they go back into the day-to-day grind. Can you actually start to help that whole system? If it's an organization of even 100 people, 50 people, 300, how do you start to embed a different type of culture where there's more regulation involved?
Because if the leaders aren't regulated,
impossible. It's top down, man. Always is. And it comes from the CEO is every time. Every single time. I've never seen an example where it's not. And whatever level of shadow or whatever lack of regulation or whatever anxieties they have, whatever things are lurking that they don't handle. And there's a great podcast that Jerry Colonna did with the Gimlet guys, startup podcast. You can reference it here and put it on the notes.
We'll link to it.
Yeah. It's brilliant because Jerry's awesome. Psychoanalytic based executive coach who everybody trusts, but Jerry's a guy that's going right after your mother and father issues consistently. I mean, every conversation is going there. So I'm not saying anything new, but the state of the leaders is going to set the state of the company and the culture. And if they're not doing their homework, they're in trouble. So I like this thing about taking teams, if they're progressive enough and willing enough to go to Amsterdam,
do mushrooms.
Yeah.
Drop in a little bit.
Yeah.
learn what that means.
And I think a lot of leaders are curious. I mean, people ask me all the time, like, do you know the circle, or how do I do this extra work? Because they recognize there's a key in there that if I can regulate myself, I think something could be different.
Like, how have you seen that play out then with the clients or the people that you worked with? Like, what are some of the transformations or the changes that you've seen, like before and after, before you've started working with someone? And then when you start to teach some of these principles, and I mean, I'll be honest, even as someone who, I certainly haven't been your client, but as like a friend and mentee of yours, I've learned a lot from you that I've applied to some success in some degree, but at the same time, I'm also still learning. Like, even this conversation right now, this little tidbit about like the person who's regulated,
Yeah.
versus the person who's anxious. I'm now like, understanding like a past relationship that I had because of that. Because I'm like, I thought I was firm and established, but clearly I was being drawn into that more anxious state because this woman that I was interested in was like in that energy, So,
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is I learn something from you every time that we sit down, which is incredible. And so I'd love to just hear a little bit, like example wise, like how have you seen leaders change as a result of your impact, your work?
So if you think about that open loop system about anxiety and the relationship you're in, think about sexually. If you're actually intimate with someone at the physical level, who's spiritually more hygienic, for instance? Who's emotionally more hygienic? If you're engaging with people that are not as kind of developed as you won't feel good after. It's heavy. So you want to get the sage out, but that's hard lessons. Those are the ayahuasca teachings that are so beautiful, is you start looking at energy and you start looking at just how I feel in my system after I engage with somebody. I mean, that's the sexual part I think is interesting. I think from a organizational standpoint, I mean, if you walk into a room with someone, I mean, like people, if you're going to VCs to raise money and some of the VCs are assholes and they're just in a certain energy and you're locked and you're much more grounded in yourself, you're not going to want to work with them. You're going to make a better choice in who your investor is just because you're a regulated person. And you actually can see the room and you're not walking in going, God, I really need these guys. I need their money. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you take their money, you're now going to be involved in that
energy.
That capital system. And they're going to drive your numbers and they're going to drive you crazy. And that'll suck. The entrepreneurs that I love that I work with who are more grounded can walk into their, the next round of funding with a head on their shoulders and actually be evaluating.
And responsive rather than reactive.
Absolutely. And like, if you're not a fit for me, it doesn't work. So in terms of the clients I work with, what I discover is I think I do two things. One is the invisible work, where that open channel we're talking about, just if I'm in a room with somebody and we don't even talk and I leave and I'm consciously being more regulated, I'm just staying with that, they just feel better when I walk out. And they think, well, what happened? They're not even sure, but it's we already explained it. We're just helping regulate. And so it doesn't even matter if they're fintech guys that I work with. Some of them are I make them breathe for 10 minutes as we begin each session. We have an hour, but it's like we're taking 10 minutes. And they're like, are you kidding me?
Let's get to this. Come on.
They're so funny, and they're Oxfords and they're all buttoned up. But after about 3 months, they're just like, that is one of the best tools, and it's slowing me down. And so through that regulation, then they start to sit back and look at their calendars and go, wow, what's my prioritization? So if I'm driving from anxiety, if I'm on a team where everyone's anxious, I hate working for anxious people because they want extra information from me that's not necessary. And it's just for me to take care of their anxiety, or CEOs that are anxious. And then I got to do 3 extra emails to satisfy them because something got done, but it didn't really need to get done. So I think a regulated team, like helping people get down to that, is going to make a big difference in terms of, I can do better work. I can work less hard, a little more regulated. I think Patagonia is a great example of a company that just, you just go surf, just do your thing and come back, and regulated, you're going to be far more effective. So that's where I'm interested in teams, is helping them and the leaders of it at least come in and understand that and have some sense that they're driving the inefficiencies of their teams. And if we can all sort of sit back and look at how we operate, how we talk to each other, how we're coming in, if we're coming in hot from tough meetings or whatever it is, really making sure we're on the same page before we start, then we're going to have a high quality conversation. That could be 30 minutes instead of an hour. Suddenly you shaved off 30 minutes. The calendar looks different. How long do our meetings really have to be? And we use this example about my kids when we moved to New York. You see people, this is so funny. it's like you're in the subway and you're running and you're getting your subway card and oh my God, the train's going. I ever try to get my daughter through and we're like, go, go, go. And you're swiping the card.
And it doesn't work. It says you need to swipe
and
again.
Someone's running and that little gate thing and you swipe and they think it's swiped and they hit their stomach and they roll over and you're like, ooh. And then there's the whole recovery and then you've already missed the train. My kid's mom is great at this. She just looks and is like, slow the fuck down, motherfucker. Let's walk and swipe and we're going to catch the train. And it's always true. So I think the work that I do a lot that I see is it's good knowing all that tactical stuff and you have to. I think that there's a lot of bad coaches out there who don't get that you have to have all of it. You have to have the soft skill side, be able to dive and plunge really deep because that could show up as something you have to deal with. But sometimes it is that your priority setting system sucks or, you haven't really looked quarterly. Like your processes aren't in place in ways that could work. Or maybe the head of marketing is just not cutting the mustard. And how do you know that? Or maybe your hiring processes. I mean, you do have to understand, at least have enough context. But again, that's just the entry point. And the fun stuff is down in where you start to synthesize and they're bringing their full self in and they start to recognize the emotional responsibility that they have. And the term is being responsible for your emotional wake. So if you're responsible for emotional wake, you know what you're bringing into every room. And hopefully we're all making mistakes. We're all trying, but at least you can recover. Hopefully a little bit quicker.
Because you have that awareness of how your actions and how your sense of presence is impacting those around you, your
Absolutely.
team, all those sorts of things.
If somebody walked in the room right now completely pissed off and didn't say a word and sat down next to you, we would change. And so get a room of 8 people and one person comes in. I play a lot of pickup basketball, 5-on-5. It's funny, if you have a team of 5 in pickup and one guy doesn't know what he's doing or one guy like plogging up the middle, the rest of the 5, you don't play basketball. You're just like, it sucks. So it's amazing how one person can shift the dynamic in terms of flow, in terms of communication and all that. And I think we have to be honest about that. And are we that guy?
Oftentimes that's the hardest part. And this is bringing up so much for me as we're talking about this, because I'm now like reflecting. I'm like, oh, this is why things were so messy for, me. And, so I moved to New York. We were just talking about this. I moved to New York about 2 years ago and came in thinking, okay, I would come here and I would hustle and I would meet people and, make things work and really take things to the next level with what we were working on with the third wave. And, then we launched Synthesis last year. And then, I was hinting at earlier, there was a bit of a breakdown earlier this year with what we went through. And now with everything that we're talking about, I'm realizing it's because for most of the time that I was living in New York, I was operating from this very anxious, reactive, scarcity mindset for various reasons. But then that energy showed up in how I ran my business, showed up in disorganization, showed up in poor communication, showed up in like all these other things. And for much of it, I was like, oh, the issue is there, the issue is there, the issue is there. And then when I got knocked upside the face earlier this year after all this ayahuasca, I think that's when I finally was like, okay, the issue is definitely with me. And now how do I go about like actually addressing that? And it's probably going to happen again, but being aware of it as it comes up and not here, not in the head, but really here, like physically, like in my body, in my heart, in my stomach, in my just general organism. Like when I'm around people who I don't feel comfortable with, when I'm around people who, it's like, how do you sense that? How do you observe that? And how do you create boundaries? I think understanding boundaries, that's been my biggest takeaway since working with ayahuasca. It's been like clearly to take care of myself. That comes first, because if you can't take care of yourself, if you're in this anxious reactive state like we've been talking about, that's going to be, projected outwards. And often the hardest work for someone who's in a position of leadership or power or a CEO is having the humility to step back and say, okay, this is my work, this is my problem. And the reason X, Y, and Z isn't working out here is not because it's the wrong team member or because that person isn't doing the right thing, but it's got to always start with, I think, personal responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my brain goes so many places, but one is in terms of managers, and somehow if their directs aren't actually doing what they think they should do, they're like, oh, they're not A players. And my question back is like, what kind of fucking manager are you? Like, are you tip top that you can manage someone so well that they're going to be awesome? Like, you didn't make this person awesome. And let's like get it down. Can they actually do the work at the end of the day? Maybe they're not talented enough. Fine. But let's get granular enough to identify and highlight talent But before talent, there's processes and letting them know, having good agreements, and they know the scope of the work and the expectations, and all that stuff is important. The other thing I think is interesting is the CEO guys, the men and women, both, they don't have the liberty to be insecure in the room, in the position, because they're being looked to, and the investors are looking to them. The board is looking to them. They walk into a company and they can go, I heard this example one time, they can just like taste the coffee or something. And like the coffee's bad, and they're like, oh, this coffee sucks. And they walk away, and people are like, who made the coffee? What is that? Because they're being watched. And suddenly they're no longer themselves. They're a persona. They actually have to project a sense of security and knowledge and a fundamental sense of leadership, which is important. And if you get behind the closed doors, what you start to hear is they're like, here I've hired all these super smart people that are smarter than me. And they know more about their domain than I do. Like they know far more about product than I do. They know about engineering way better than I do. How do I know what the timeline is? If what they're telling me is the right timeline, can they deliver on that? I can't say that's fast or that's slow. I don't know if the marketing team should have delivered on the thing they said within the time of the launch. So there's like this blend of, you see it a lot in boys in their 15, 16, where they're projecting what they think a man would look like, but they're terrified. So it comes off and their interactions are actually not right. Like it actually isn't suited for the human being in front of them, because they're not actually located in themselves, because they're scared, but I'm supposed to act like I know. So then you're like, what's up with that dude? He's weird, whatever. So I think it's true. That's beautiful what you're seeing in terms of that progress. I mean, we were talking during that time, and it's sort of like, who's the asshole? And then you're just like, we have to put it ourselves.
You do have to point it yourself. Yeah, absolutely.
And if hopefully you can have that conversation with your team and be like, oh my God, that was totally on me. I got it. Can we start? And maybe trust has been broken enough, or, things are downstream, so you're not going to recover that thing. Okay, good. Lesson learned. It's probably not until your second or third company before you're even going to get a sense of like how that works. Your first company you're going to make mistakes. It's the only way. So sweet.
That's just part of the path.
Yeah. And everybody wants to fast track it, but yeah, just get hammered. And I think the ayahuasca thing is great too. I mean, just say yes, let your big ego do its thing. That's what you're supposed to do. We're all humans. But maybe we have a sense of humor about it. But if you fall on your face, good. That's important.
You need to suffer. You need to go through. You need to go into those dark places. You need to like really sometimes hit rock bottom.
100%. And have good friends. I used to isolate. New York taught me a huge amount about asking for help and texting people that I never thought would show up. And lo and behold, there's good people here that will take your text at a late time and be like, why don't you just come over? And I'm like, really? And you end up having a really powerful conversation and invitation into a deeper level of friendship that I didn't even know was possible. So I'm grateful for it. I think that this place of somewhere between feeling relaxed enough that you don't check yourself too hard, but when you get your licks and you're down, you ask for help, and you have enough good people around you that they're calling you out and supporting you. What is that stat? Like, you're the aggregate of the 5 people that you spend the most time with?
Yeah, and being mindful of that and being aware of that. And again, this comes back to like boundaries and who you spend time with and who you choose to invest in and who you open up to. And, these are all like really things that, again, I knew intellectually to some degree. I'd learned because I'd listened to a number of podcasts or read the books that I needed to read or whatever it might be. But I mean, that's the thing with life, and experience. You'll learn one thing after doing the work for 5 years, you'll learn another thing after doing the work for 10 years. And it's just a matter of like, you go deeper and deeper and deeper, not only into elevated states and bliss and love and acceptance and transcendence, but also into deeper and deeper states of suffering and like, holy shit, because I have this power, this responsibility, because I am in a leadership position, my behaviors, my actions, the way that I present myself is impacting all these other people around me. To recognize that and understand that, it requires a lot of maturity and a lot of awareness. And you only can learn that through doing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And then coming back to the tools, the therapy, a good coach, the psychedelics, if that's something that you're open to. And what's so beautiful is it's now here, but and available. You can make a couple calls and probably someone's going to have some avenue in that can support you in that, which I think is amazing. Yeah. It's powerful.
I want to transition into forward thinking a little bit. So
Sure.
we've talked a lot about, our own work and, your past with ayahuasca and psychotherapy and getting into executive coaching. And you come from such a diverse background, because of all the work that you've done, because of where you find yourself now in New York, from your experience, and keeping in mind business is changing quite a bit, right? And the way that we perceive the world is changing quite a bit. And I think it's largely brought on by the ecological crisis, by people recognizing that just pursuing money and status is, at the end of the day, very unfulfilling. More and more people want to work in jobs or positions where they can pursue purpose, pursue meaning, pursue something that really resonates here with
God
them
bless the
in the heart.
man.
Yeah, all these millennial things, right?
It's great.
So for you, what does leadership mean? So how do you define leadership? Let's start there. How do you define leadership?
That's great. What comes to mind is Colin Powell. There's a really great quote from him that I would hack. But a good leadership, I think, is being centrally located in yourself, recognizing the emotional wake that you're leaving on a consistent basis, being secure enough and located enough to be able to make hard calls and hard decisions, and clarity in terms of what you're saying yes to, with the understanding of also that means no to quite a lot of things as well. An ability to read the room, to read your people. I think that's a really key element these days, is really understanding how to engage people, how to move people, how to motivate people, how to inspire them. Good leaders are able to do that. I think that's a really big skill. Technical knowledge, all of that's very helpful in terms of the domain. And when I think about leadership, I mean, are we looking at it politically? Are we looking at it from a business standpoint? I don't spend a lot of time in politics. I spend much more at least from a business standpoint. But I don't mind this benevolent dictator thing. I'm kind of into it, which means that certain people have enough experience. They've done their homework internally, externally, that they're able to stand and see something that the rest of us can't see, and that they engender enough trust that they can kind of help guide the rest of us in a certain direction. I don't know if that's articulate enough, but you can feel a good leader when they walk into the room, because it's somebody that you want to talk to and that you suddenly you're up to whatever they're up to.
And you trust them. There's a level of intuitive trust in that relationship.
Like one of my favorite leaders right now, I'll make a shout out to this guy, Sam Levin. He's CEO of a small SaaS business in California. Sam's one of the quintessential guys for me, because I've worked with him for a couple of years, and he comes out of Techstars, and he has all the fundamentals down consistently. He's a French guy, so he can run the business. He knows how to do it. But Sam is equal parts self-introspection, equal parts discipline. So he'll wake up early, he meditates, he does his self-work, he loves his family, he shows up to his kids. And a guy that's willing to get creative and iterate in front of his team and totally fail, and people love him. Like, you will follow him because he just engenders this trust, and he gets a little smile and a twinkle in his eye, and I'm like, oh, where's he going? So he's smart enough to sort of see a path. He has enough vision, and yet he's curious enough as to how each and everybody fits into that vision, because he wants everybody to be in the best place. And I don't know, I think that's really hard to do. But he's always in my mind whenever I meet new leaders. It's just like, how do we kind of bring out their greatest potential? Sam, he's so well balanced in all those things, and a huge amount of respect for him. And even coaching with him, I sit back and listen far more than I speak, So it's cool. He's game for this creative. He's game to know that there's an answer that he doesn't know yet that will come out of synthesis. It'll come out of dialogue. And he's patient enough and curious enough.
So almost like kind of getting back to what we were talking about, the lessons that ayahuasca teach you about living in ambiguity and being comfortable with the unknown. I think that's another element that, you didn't mention with leadership, but that's got to be key as well. It's like, how do you handle the unknowns?
Absolutely. Yeah, the ambiguity.
And then how do you remain centered and grounded when you're faced with the unknowns because there's, I think the natural tendency is to get anxious and the mind starts worrying. The mind starts, well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? And what if this happens?
Right.
You know?
But then you're making actions that are taking care of your own anxiety instead of actually what the situation is calling for. My only version of that is I was a therapist for a long time. And I would get into session and it would always happen somewhere, someone would be talking and I would hit a point, and it still happens to the day on every session, where I don't know if I can help them, really don't know what I'm doing, and I don't trust myself. I'm freaked out. And I learned to suspend anything for about 7 minutes. And it usually comes in around minute 32 of my sessions. And I've learned just to sit and feel my anxiety and appreciate it and just breathe. And what I've learned is there's a space in there where things are already reorganizing. And then what ends up coming out of that space is something new and synthesized that we haven't thought of before. As opposed to what I used to do is say, oh, I need to fix this. So people feel like I know what I'm doing, as opposed to I'm willing to hang out in this ambiguity. That's a very micro level of it, but I imagine a lot of the good leaders can sit back and hang out the ambiguity, take some breaths, and let some part of the trail is going to open up, and are willing enough to let that be highlighted rather than they have to actually make that happen.
Yeah, there's this, I forget the term, but Nassim Taleb has talked about this quite a bit in his work with like Anti-Fragile and Black Swan, essentially how there's so many issues that are caused because people think they need to be doing something when in fact the best option is just to do nothing at all. In other words, oftentimes the best answer is simplicity. The best answer is keeping things minimal, to do less. But we have this tendency to kind of to just put our hands in places where they really don't need to go. You know?
Because we're anxious.
Because we're anxious.
Yeah.
Again,
we're unregulated.
We're unregulated.
It's amazing, right?
And just to bring it back to that psychotherapeutic background and maybe like a full circle on the ayahuasca and your own work, where does that unregulation come from? Why is it that so many business leaders and so many of us in general have this anxiety, and why aren't we better regulated and more in touch with ourselves? And why haven't most of us as a culture and society really like developed these inner things?
Well, a few things. One is, I think it's what families we grew up in. You're going to recreate that consistently until you do your homework and you uncover the unconscious. I mean, that's deep, early systems of your mom and dad and the way that they process their emotions. You're going to do it just like they did until you don't. Number one. It's rote. There's just a certain level of work to do that. There's a second thing that comes to mind with that. Here's the other thing about that. Anxiety is not a bad thing, actually. And I don't know, people say this thing like, anxiety is just excitement without breath. Okay, maybe. Whatever it is, anxiety is hard. It sucks. And sometimes I have it and I'm breathing. But this Jungian psychoanalyst said the most brilliant thing into the day, I love it, is basically you're going to have two different things going on in your life if you're creating something. He says they live at the bottom of your bed. So when you wake up in the morning, at the foot of your bed is this gremlin, two different gremlins. One is anxiety, the other is depression. The anxiety will be there because you're going to be trying things and you're afraid and you just are doing stuff that's the unknown. So naturally, our systems want to feel safe. So the second we start doing anything, we're going to feel anxiety. It's okay. Actually, anxiety is not the thing that anything's wrong. It just means you're probably in emotion. Or you feel depression because you're not taking action. You're not moving. And I love that you just get to choose. So a lot of times I think people are looking at what's happening internally and then make decisions about what they're doing, whether that's good or bad, as opposed to separating those out and going, all right, there's some emotional content here. It's highly uncomfortable. I'm afraid. I'm scared. I'm anxious. It's part of the human system. And I love this thing that I can't think of the guy who said it, but it's basically there's a pendulum between confidence and fear. And anxiety lives on the fear side. And it's swinging back and forth. And his point is regardless of whether you're confident or whether you're afraid, it doesn't matter. The action's the action. So a lot of people are waiting around to be confident to take this next step, thinking that that's the right read. You can make just about a decision if you're confident as you would if you were afraid.
And sometimes a worse decision because it's maybe out of arrogance or maybe out of hubris or whatever it might
be. Could be. And I just love that. It just sort of takes away this idea that, something's wrong, But we also, I think if it's unchecked anxiety, that's where the problems come up. But if it's up and we're working with it and we're breathing into it and we're having our practices, then I think we have a better chance of making a clear decision. But I made a lot of decisions from an anxious place, and they've been good ones too. So one of the things we were talking about that's fun, and I think you and I just looked at coming to New York City, and I had never seen it before 2015, admittedly. Never stepped foot into this place, and I came from very suburban background. Whatever moves, people come here, they're making moves, and they have a dream, and trying to get into this place when you haven't ever seen it feels like catching a train that's going 90 miles an hour, and you're at a standstill, and it can rip your arm off. And this place can also take you down a back alley and beat the shit out of you and take your wallet and just leave you, for a while. It can feel like that. But we were talking about like how that inner work can really help you move and create in uncomfortable or challenging situations. And if the suffering's so much that if you're like a refugee and you're in crisis, you have to move. You actually have to be defending yourself because it's a life or death situation. So like the human system is going to flip the switch on, and you're going to do what you can to move forward. I think a lot of people, at least here in a sort of the demographic that we know and work within, it's comfortable enough that you don't actually have to act. And so the paralysis can set in, and you can get overwhelmed from an emotional standpoint, and it can get really scary. And I think that this deeper work that you can do through the psychedelics and whatnot can help you handle these extreme states and still have mobility without paralysis. And that's a really an interesting place to be. And I know the flow guys like Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler, like sort of looking at the SEALs, for instance, and how these guys are trained to like get into these high intense states that would paralyze most people, and like they're breathing and they're calm and they're able to see the next move. And there's something about, I think, the psychedelic space that opens up that opportunity because it creates such chaos at an internal level. And if you work with it enough, you're used to the chaos, that then you realize, oh, I've got more room, I've got more space. Just because I'm feeling these things doesn't mean I can't get up and go do the next action or go take that next step. It's cool for the people that want to create, because it gives a little more, I don't know if it's viscosity, where it gives some less friction between the emotional states and the abilities actually to make moves. And that was a big piece for me.
In coming to New York and living here. And
yeah, man. I mean, that first year was insomnia, panic attacks. And I mean, coming here with no work, 2 kids, a wife at the time. And wow. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it. And every day was so crazy, so scary. And you just had the survival. I don't even know where the next check will come from. And how that switch got flipped being here. And the states just got heightened and heightened and heightened, and not sleeping days in just out of fear, but still being able to wake up.
And move and do the next thing.
Yeah,
and not
work out in the morning, sweat a little bit, take a deep breath, shift the mindset, reset, and do it again. Repeat until some kind of daylight starts to happen. And, it required some big moves we've kind of spun some stories, but that time, it was like 2017, and had some crazy invite to go to Necker Island. And at this point I had $30,000 left in my savings, and not the income to support my family. I think it gave us like a month left. And it cost like $25,000 to go to Necker. And just making a move like that, like, okay, I'm going to spend $25K, just trust I'm going to leap, and then something will happen there that will provide the next thing, which is kind of fun from a coaching perspective, is where I like to coach people, is into that scary, exciting, right at that edge. Like if you lean forward enough, ground will be there. And sort of putting that to the test, I think, is always an interesting concept.
Going out into the unknown.
Yeah.
Again, and being able to handle the
unknown.
The
thing I notice about the entrepreneurs that really do well is in proportion by which you're able to relate to your own anxiety. If your anxiety is too high and you hit paralysis, then you can't actually move. But if you're able to work with that and regulate it, then you actually can take steps. And I notice people's success is sort of related to their ability to move. What kind of relationship do they have with their internal states? I said that in a roundabout way, but in proportion to by which they're in touch with their anxiety is in proportion by which they can actually make moves and climb, because some of it's dicey. And look, the people that have had success in the entrepreneurial world, it's not like it just happened. I mean, I've been in a lot of rooms where, 4 weeks of cash and we've raised 80 million. And how did we get here? That's a super interesting, scary place for people to be. And how do you problem solve out of that? You're not going to do it. I mean, of course you're anxious, but how are we going to regulate and then start to look for where the crack is? And maybe they make a move and they do the next thing and then the next thing hits. Like there's a series of steps over and over and this kind of resilience constantly up against it until at some point, sometimes it breaks through. It's a little bit random.
But it's a great example.
Yeah.
It's a really good example of like I think the need to be delusional at times and the need to be like, I think more than anything, I was having a conversation about a month ago with a potential investor. And he said something along the lines of like, well, with the work that you've done with the third wave and synthesis over the last few years, like, what have you learned? And for me, the first thing that came up was, I think I've really learned to like trust myself more than anything. That I've continued to go out into the unknown, to try this, to fail at that, to try this, to fail at that, to get hit upside the head. And I know enough about myself to know that I can still get up, to know that I can still make a move, that I can talk to someone, that I have the support system in place. And that at a fundamental emotional level, that I feel safe and secure. That even if X, Y, and Z were to go wrong, I tried, who knows what it was, and I just totally fucking land flat and like everything goes wrong. I know at the end of the day, I'm still going to be better off than most people. So I think that also, at least on a personal level for me, comes back to this sense of like emotional regulation, comes back to this sense of like, the unconscious and the subconscious. I was fortunate enough to be raised in a really loving household where I had most of my needs taken care of. So on that like fundamental child sort of, psyche level, I feel safe. And for me, I think, getting into this sense of regulation versus anxiety, working with leaders, et cetera, this is why the work that you're doing with them is so important, because I think ultimately it's helping them to understand that on like a really fundamental knowing level, that they can drop in and they can be with themselves and they can feel secure and safe in that knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot more room. I mean, as you're saying, you fell flat on your face. Man, I ran out of money twice. Kids and the whole thing, and a $5,400 a month apartment. Like, it's crazy, the burn is so high, and then you run out of money. And like, what do you do? And you've been so scared to run out of money. So scared. Oh my God, it's going to be the end. And like, if the curtains close, what happens? And then, okay, there's air down here. And maybe I have a new idea, or maybe I'll do that next thing. And it comes down to putting that picnic blanket down in that pit of despair, or whatever that thing is. If you can hang out down there, give it some room. And I love what you said about support. I cannot stress that enough. And I'm finding more and more, I think that there's more language for it. I think people, that level of conversation is much higher now. Look at the online, you have talk therapy you can get. Coaching is everywhere now. It's like the rage. And so people are saying, oh, support's okay. So the stigma has been lifted that if I need support, it's no longer equated with weakness. It's just equated with, oh, that will actually help me optimize or work in a different way, or I'm gonna serve better. It gives me a better chance for whatever kind of success, however I define that. And that's a big deal, and it's just more baked in these days. But like you're saying, without that reach out, you can't do it alone. It's so important. And that idea of sitting down in that pit of despair, you can do a little bit of that alone, but it definitely helps to have.
You need support.
You need support.
Whether it's family or whether it's friends or whether it's business partners, you need someone who reminds you of your greatness, who reminds you of what you're really capable of, and who will stand by you even when things are shit and you're like, you yourself believe that like, oh fuck, and they lift you up.
Yeah. Or maybe you have been an asshole and you just messy in front of it and like, yeah, I'm being an asshole. Like this is just me too, totally imperfect. And yeah, those are rare, good people. I think this takes years to foster that level of safety. But man, having more, I think it's hard in America. We have so little fabric that I think we have to work extra hard to make sure that we have those types of people that you can knock on their door and be like, man, I suck.
Help me.
Yeah.
Vulnerability is
Yeah.
not easy for men in leadership positions who feel like they have it all figured out.
No. And again, I'm not a big fan of making an identity around vulnerability in some of the places I've lived in the past, certain communities. It's a little much, like identifying as the vulnerable guy, and we're these vulnerable guys together. Like, enough. I prefer the guys that, people are doing shit, but we have the skill set. It's a lot more interesting.
Agreed. I want to touch on two things before we wrap up, because we've been rapping for a while now. This is an hour and a half goes by, and it's like nothing.
So much fun.
Totally. So one, a lot of what we've been talking about is emotional regulation. And you're still in New York here, and I'd just be curious, like from a very tactical, practical level, like what do you do to stay clean, to stay present, to just be able to show up with your clients and be that presence that you talk about?
That's a great question. So during that 2017 year of hell, where New York City had the heel of the boot on my neck, I learned a few things. Number one is the morning routine is so critical. I cannot emphasize the morning routine enough. It is the reset button of life. So now I have the same routine every single morning. It varies a little bit, but I hop out of bed, I throw my yoga mat down, and I'm doing everyone knows I do it, but the 7-minute workout. I feel like I'm a vegan, sort of preaching veganism, but the 7-minute workout. But I start moving my body, or I have a tennis partner now, and we play 3 times a week at 7:30, 8 a.m., hit balls, and come back. And so, boom, I've already moved my body. And so that's an instant mindset changer. So it just clears the palate, and I'm already in a different, so there's a massive state change. Because I wake up every morning that I suck. Honestly, I wake up that I suck. I'm scared. Nothing's going to work. People don't like me. I mean, this is my inner dialogue. That's kind of my default thing. And I don't know that will ever go away, and I don't actually need it to. I really don't think I'm going to heal that thing so much as it's just kids in the back seat that they just need to be in car seats with their sippy cups.
Lock them down.
Yeah, exactly. And they need to know where we're going.
Keep them distracted a little.
So the only way I know how to deal with that is to go and move my body and get myself moving to do a mood state change, whether that's 20 minutes on the bike, Peloton, or whatever. So that's one step. The other is then I do like a 5-minute breath work of a strong, like box breathing or the different tools. I love on that. And then I do a 10 to 15-minute meditation. And those are the 3 things I can't mess with. Whatever else happens in the day, I don't care. But if that fundamental morning platform is such a key to my sense of success and how well I do. And a few other things is I'm learning a lot more about this working less thing, that I can get into my work systems and think that my work systems are correct. And then I'm sort of a slave to my processes. So it's really good to travel and get out for a couple days, even in here, hopping upstate, or if I can get in the water. Just being away and coming back helps me come back and look at everything and go, is this the best way I could be doing things? Kind of this constant process of checking that out is a really important step for me. The 2 other things that have changed my life is texting people in advance to set up good stuff socially, where I'm making sure I've got inspiring people that I'm constantly engaging with. Because man, I learned so much. I love being around people that I'm learning from. It's been huge. And then, of course, my kids. I mean, making sure that I'm staying in touch with them on a daily basis, and whatever that means, is key. So those are the pieces, I would say, the fundamentals. And then I have a coach. I mean, I keep somebody, and I see them every other week, and it keeps it clean. I just can let go, and they're holding my trajectory, and they know what I want to create, where I'm going. So it's nice to have someone else taking care of that, so I can fall in. And they said, if I forget or I'm not on course with that, whatever's showing up in the way of that, they're able to sort of reset my course. I remember, and then I'm off to the races again. And so I have a consistent touch point with that.
Accountability to some degree.
Accountability.
External accountability.
Yes, exactly. And they know me well enough to know where I'm going to goof off or I'm going to just miss. But they're kind enough as well to know, man, maybe you needed to spend a week and just fuck around, make room for that. So those are some nice pieces that I found. It can't be too rigid, but just enough that I can keep moving my steps forward. And then I fall off. In June, I was depressed for a couple weeks, but coming back.
Always coming back, always getting back up, always
Exactly.
finding that. And I think that speaks to like the last question that I wanted to ask you before we end is like, what's your deeper why? You know, why is this work important to you? Why do you do what you do? What keeps you coming back even when you have these days or weeks or months that aren't so great?
Yeah. I think a big value of mine is, for some reason, is the potentialization of other people. I just like seeing people do well. And it's fun. There's something that happens for me when I watch someone access some part of themselves that they haven't seen before, or they've done something they didn't know they could do. And the way my system is set up, like it almost just lights me up. And so perhaps it's a little selfish or something, but that's what I love. And I've taken enough risks and blown up enough of my life and structures and put myself in really challenging situations in order to allow that channel to be open. And it's amazing to be 45 and kind of created the structures and located in myself, getting to let my gift, which I feel is to be the spark for someone else's fire. I mean, that's my gig. To have a life based on that, to have income based on that, and it's meaningful to me. And it's interesting because it puts me in the room with people that are intellectually far brighter than I am, than I'll ever be, who are pulling levers at levels, on the planetary levels, that I like what they do is having impact and is affecting what we experience on a day-to-day level, that I can get in the room with those folks and I don't have to do what they do. And I'm never going to compete at that level, but I know what I do. And I can just hang out in that and relax enough. And that's a fun place to sit. It's a beautiful thing. It's cool to walk into a company and suddenly be with a leader. I don't know why I got in the side door, but I'm in the room knowing really what's going on within a few hours. And that really feeds me. It's like an interesting puzzle. And if I can make things a little bit better, and if that's showing up in product a little bit differently, or if that leader is touching into their humanity a little bit more, and maybe this could just be me self-delusional, but if I can really shift a little bit of their humanity to become a bit more human, a bit more kind, and more in touch with what they're doing, because my firm belief is that everybody has a gift. We're all unique, and if we finally get in touch with what that is, and we double down on it and develop that trust of ourselves and have some humility and start doing stuff, like I feel like the pieces of the puzzle start to fit better together. And a lot of people don't trust themselves. A lot of people are connected outside. So I just feel like we have a better chance if we have humans being a little bit more human.
In relationship with themselves, knowing the deepest parts of themselves, knowing the shitty parts of themselves, knowing the greatest parts of themselves, trusting themselves in that process.
And if they have that with themselves, then the chances are they're going to have that with a circle of people around them. And they're going to show up a bit more real into the day-to-day. And we love real people. We all love real people. The second you see a real person in a room, you want to know them. And you can't mistake it, and you can't fake it. Not for too long anyway. And that I hate to use the word authenticity because it doesn't mean much, but that type of authentic expression, I mean, it's well earned. There's scars underneath that, and those are the people I love, and I want to make a lot of room that people don't have to feel like people are so much closer to their gift than they think. That's the beauty of it. It's just so layered with a bunch of stuff we think other people want us to be. It's painful. So,
I love that.
One human at a time.
We're closer to the gift than we think.
Yeah, the gift is really right there. That's the alchemist. In some way, you have to go on some big journey, and
then you realize, oh wait,
the church is right there. And you just start digging.
I had it the whole time,
but I needed to go see everything in order to capture it. So, and it's good. Getting older is good. 20s are hard, man. 30s are tough. I mean, you just, I think age is a beautiful thing, and that's the other thing I would say is get elders in your life. Get those. I'm 45, so I need the 65-year-olds, 70-year-olds that just have a bit more perspective. They're like, you'll be fine.
Well, this is why I love you. This is why I love our relationship, and this is why I've always looked up to you as a mentor and as like someone in my life who, is just you're authentic, you're real, you've done the work. And it's always for me like an honor to sit down and just be with you and learn from you and all that. So
wow.
Just wanted to let you know that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. All the imperfections are okay that I have. Yeah, it's beautiful. And I just want to say, I think the work that you're doing is, the one thing I was going to say is you remind me of myself. That's what I told you when I first met you, is like in my late 20s in the ayahuasca scene, I was just going to surf the biggest wave, because I consider ayahuasca like surfing, and you go out to Waimea or whatever, some of the big waves out in the ocean. And I just wondered, what wave could I surf? And if I could surf that wave, it would prove my spiritual, like, I would just like, give it to me. And I would hit some walls, and I like your willingness to be like, we're going to do circles and we're going to like get people in and really start to change them. And like, you need that kind of fire blended with a little naivety. Because if you know that, like afterwards you look back and you're like, how did I do that? Like if I had actually known how hard that would be, I wouldn't have done it. And so that's what I was appreciating, was like, keep going, man. Because I think the third way is an incredible space and platform. This ability to reach all these people that, if they can open their consciousness, maybe they just go once. Oh my God, already. Maybe there's a life shift there. What's that 1% sailboat thing? If the compass moves 1%, but over 20 years, that's a pretty significant change.
That's a huge change.
And I feel like that's what you guys are, at least you're buying into a micro change, but you also are offering macro change.
Yeah, because I think the fundamental belief with a lot of the work that we're doing is that psychedelics, when used with intention and responsibility, allow us to know ourselves on a deep, deep level, which gives us that sense of safety and security and trust, and knowing that we're okay, and that, like you said, we're closer to our gift than we think that we are. And it's right there. It's right under the surface of the fear, of the anxiety, of the anger, the rage, whatever it might be. It's right there, and it's just, you got to go through a lot of layers to get to it. But psychedelics, like unlike anything else, they put you in touch with it like that, and that's what's so beautiful about them. Yeah,
and God, it's so true. And as you were talking, it made me think of this James Hollis thing. It's a Jungian idea that we have two different adulthoods that you and I have talked about. Is you have 0 through 18, where you're in full development, family of origin, the culture you're in, all the different socioeconomic forces that come in and sort of shape what you are. And then like from 18 to 37, 38, you get your provisional adulthood. And it's only in reaction to or in service of those first 18 years. And then 38, you go through transition, and then in your 40s, 50s, and early 60s, you get to like do your authentic adulthood. And what's so fun is we talk about that with 20 and 30-year-olds, and they're like, well, shit, do I just do nothing until I get to my authentic adulthood? But that's the beauty is if you have that support, you're supposed to go into it. You're supposed to be hammering into walls and be hungry and go and do these things. And maybe you get married and just do it and like put yourself in the situation and through that growth, and then you get a little more wise to it. But it's like, get in the game. It's so much more interesting. The sidelines is boring.
It's boring.
Yeah. And that's the thing I was coming back to you, is like, you're such a lightning rod. You're like, I'll get on stage and
do whatever.
I'm cool with that.
Yeah. Put myself out there, you know, just feel like I have something to say, even if at times it's not the best thing to say, or even if at times it's not,
right.
Whatever it might be. I think, we learn by doing, and we learn by putting ourselves out there and failing and tripping.
But it's honest.
It's honest, yeah.
You're honest, and that's the beautiful thing. There's light and there's honesty, and that translates. And not people probably going to remember what you said, but you were this guy that did this thing and was pure. Great. That'll catch. And so keep going.